All right. For the audience that doesn't know you, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hey, everybody. My name's Steve Murphy.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a retired 38-year police officer. The last 26 I spent as a special agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration. I've been retired now for 11 years, and that kind of came about because of a TV show called Narcos on Netflix. And that led into a worldwide speaking tour, which my partner Javier Pena and I have been doing now for 9 years. Not sure how long it's going to go because we're already booking things for next year for 2025. So that's kind of exciting. Done a few things on TV and documentaries, and recently last year or this year did the Real CSI Miami, had a couple episodes on that. And then I work on a project called The Lost Clipper, which is like an old cold case file involving the disappearance of 15 Americans in 1938 over in Micronesia in the South Pacific. So Javier and I are the lead investigators on that. And run a podcast myself, like you do, authored a book. I think I'm busier in retirement than I was when I was working.
Correct. And as we discussed, you do have a book known as How We Took Down Pablo Escobar Manhunters.
Right. It's right there, if you can see it.
I can't see it.
Oh, okay.
Show us. Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah.
A cheesy commercial.
Right. And so, and you got your podcast, as you mentioned, and your speaking business. So, going from there, the most famous thing that you've done is the Pablo Escobar investigation, right?
That's what I'm probably best known for.
Yes. So, and also in the TV show Narcos, you are the guy that it's based off of. So
yeah, one of the guys.
Yeah,
a lot of guys in there.
Well, there's also Javier, but
right.
you're the main one though.
Well, so, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, other than Escobar himself, but he's not the hero of the story. So going from there, tell us, just for the viewers at least, for a little bit of context, how that all came about for the people that haven't seen Narcos and that might want to get into the show.
You mean there's people that haven't seen Narcos? Come on now. Towards the end of my career with DEA and in federal law enforcement, you have to retire at age 57. And if you've reached a high enough rank, the head of the entire agency can offer you a 3-year extension. And Javier and I both reached that rank. It's called Senior Executive Service. We were both what you refer to as special agents in charge. And the administrator had offered us the 3-year extension. I had 2 kids in college. I needed a job. I accepted the extension. But a friend of mine in Northern Virginia, right outside of DC, he kept saying, he's a small movie producer himself. He's won a couple Emmys. And he said, you need to do something with your story about Escobar. And he introduced me to 2 Hollywood producers on 2 different occasions. And honestly, you get your hopes up. You think, well, this might really be something. And both of those producers wanted to take our stories and make political statements out of it. And that's what we're not about. We're not about that at all. So we turned them down, kept working. And then in February of 2013, an old friend, a retired Marine that we'd worked with in Colombia, had called, and he introduced me to a producer out in California, and a guy named Eric Newman. Eric's the creator of the entire Narcos series. And so we talked to Eric on the phone, or I talked to him, and he gave me his little spiel, and I said, thank you, but no thank you. I think we'll pass. And he got real quiet, and I think he probably about fell out of his chair, because we've since found out that people will sell their soul to be on TV in Hollywood.
Right.
So he said, listen, I'm coming to Washington next month in March. He said, me and 2 writers, can we take you out to dinner and let us give you our ideas? And then if you say no, it's no. And this is no kidding, George. I'm thinking that's going to be a free meal at a really good restaurant. And I said, yes. And it was. We went to a French restaurant. And by the end of the night, I felt comfortable with Eric and the 2 writers. He said, so as we're leaving the restaurant, he said, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'll call Javier and I'll recommend that we move forward with you guys. Let's just see where this goes. So that was March of 2013. By May, 2 months later, we had signed contracts with Narcos, or with Netflix. And in June, I retired. In July, we were sitting in Hollywood starting to write the first season of Narcos. How it all came about.
Fair enough. So let's get a little bit more into about your career, a little bit more into at least a little bit about Escobar. So, I've watched as many documentaries as anybody else. I watched the How to Become a Drug Lord documentary. I don't know if I forget, are you in that one? Because that
Yes.
okay, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know why you wouldn't be, but I feel like I saw your face, wanted to make sure. But in that one, they're talking about how Escobar was a street thug and he was also kind of a celebrity. All right, which I found very interesting because he was not a regular drug lord. Right? He was this sort of celebrity figure, kind of like a Gotti, like a John Gotti almost, where people knew who he was, and they knew what he was about, but it wasn't. It was a mix of things. People kind of view him as Robin Hood as well. So, who was Escobar as a person, right? Who was he? What was he really about? People kind of view him as a hero in some cases, but what was he really? Who was he?
He's the farthest thing from a hero you'll ever hear about in your life. This is a guy who became the world's first narco-terrorist. So what's a narco-terrorist? It's basically a narcotics trafficker that uses terroristic activities in his criminal enterprise, right? He became the world's most wanted fugitive. The TV show America's Most Wanted, they came down and did one episode only of the whole time they were on the air of the world's most wanted. We took a crew up to Medellin for a week and they filmed and interviewed people and so forth. This is a guy who grew up very poor, represent himself as a representative of the poor people, and he's nothing more than a criminal and a thug. I mean, he started out stealing hubcaps and stealing gravestones out of cemeteries and sandblasting them and selling them back to people, that needed a headstone for a body. His first drug deal, I think, was 17 kilos where he was just helping somebody else, and he realized how much money was in it. So he went and killed that guy, a guy named Restrepo, and took over his business. This is a guy who eventually, through his ruthless, cruel, chaotic mind, his sick mind, became responsible for 80% of the world's cocaine, manufacturing and distributing 80% of the world's cocaine. I mean, it doesn't matter what business you're in. Podcasting, would you like to have 80% of the market? You'd be bigger than Joe Rogan, right?
Right.
I mean, it's just outrageous what he was able to accomplish. He introduced a level of violence in the drug trafficking business that basically the world had never seen. I mean, it's violent. The criminal world is violent to start with. But you got a guy here who, if he asks you to do something and you don't do it, he not only kills you, he kills your wife, he'll kill your children, he'll kill your dog. I mean, he'll kill your parents. It's just outrageous what he was doing. Now, he did do some, I'm glad you mentioned the Robin Hood myth, because I want to dispel that myth right now. He did do good things for poor people. He built housing for people that lived on the edge of a trash dump. And that is a good thing. Let them live there for free. He built soccer fields. He built clinics. He gave away money. He gave away food. But when his sicarios, his assassins, were killed protecting Pablo, where do you think he went to recruit new sicarios? Right back in that neighborhood. Yeah, because those people thought, man, this guy's like God. So, and here's the sad part. He go in and say, I need 100 guys who are willing to come and kill for Pablo, who are willing to die for Pablo. And he might have 300 or 400 young people step up. We're talking about children between 13 and maybe 19, 20, 21. And those are the people he's recruiting. And they were just, anything for Pablo. He put bounties on Colombian National Police officers. Go kill a police officer, I'll pay you $100. $100 for a man or a woman's life. Somebody who's brave enough to put on a uniform and go out and protect other people, innocent people, and their life is worth $100. He put a bounty on us, a bounty of $300,000 each. That's, I think, the equivalent of that now, I think, is about 1.5 million, 1.6 million. So, and I see your brain clicking there, George. He's dead. You can't collect that bounty anymore. That's off the table, right? But I mean, that's he tortured people. If he thought you were an informant, he didn't want you just killed. He wanted you tortured first because he wanted to know what you were saying about him and who you were talking to. And then I mean, he did undescribable things that I won't mention here on your podcast. This guy he was evil walking on the face of our earth. He was responsible for more than 50,000 murders, and that figure came from his own sicarios. That's not us coming up with figures.
Well, let's also not forget about the fact that he was a pedophile.
Oh yeah,
massive pedophile. Which is just the cherry on top. In what I found so crazy to me about Pablo was that he is one of the few people, I would say, in history, because you don't see this very often, where he attempted to become a politician for the sake of getting out of criminality. So most people don't know this, but he became a member of Congress, I guess, in Colombia. I guess that'd be the equivalent, and in an attempt to get diplomatic immunity. And he did for a while. It didn't last very long, but it's insane that he became a political criminal as well. Right? Or
yeah. And you know what? That's what brought a lot of undue attention on him. And just so you know, Pablo wasn't the brains. He was the head of the Medellin cartel. He wasn't the brains. It was his cousin, Gustavo Gaviria, who was the true brains of the outfit. Gustavo advised him, don't get into politics. You're bringing too much attention on us. But, at that point, Pablo had so much money and power. His ego got the best of him. The greed factor got in the way. And quite honestly, that's one thing that criminal investigators focus in on. That's something that we take advantage of. And if you remember when he was elected, he was actually elected as an alternate. But the day of the election, once his primary candidate was elected, and now Pablo's the alternate, the primary submitted his resignation for health reasons, which automatically bumped Pablo up to the primary position. That's how he got into Congress. Pablo had dreams, believe it or not. He had dreams of becoming the president of Colombia. I don't know if you've read this anywhere, but he offered to pay off the national debt of Colombia 2 different times.
He did. Yeah, I did read
billions of dollars. I mean, who can do that, right?
Very few people, and I think his net worth is estimated to be he was in the top 10 richest people of all. I don't think I should say of all time, but in modern history, I know that.
In the criminal element, in the criminal world, he is still the richest narcotics trafficker that's ever been. You look at
that we know of.
Right. Yeah, true. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, his estimated wealth was $4 billion. And right. Pablo's was $30 billion. So, I mean, $4 billion, I probably could get by on retirement in that, but it's not $30 billion, is it?
Well, let's talk about that now. Let's talk to me about current narcotics traffickers, because Pablo was I would imagine that he was the pioneer, the Steve Jobs of the narcotics world. He introduced this whole new way of doing things, and it worked. It worked insanely well. And we see this now with people like Joaquin Guzman, or El Chapo, as he's called, who is now rotting in ADX Florence, I believe in Colorado, which is the most secure prison in the world because he escaped prison twice. But now we have people like him who, cartels are known for their brutality, especially in Mexico. We get Scarface where, you get the guys that get chainsawed in half, and there's videos online of cartels publicly humiliating and killing people on video and posting it everywhere on gore websites, and anybody can find those videos. So with that being said, talk to me about the new ones. What are they about? Is it as organized as it was with Pablo? Do you think, at least, or what do you think of these guys like Joaquin Guzman?
Well, obviously the Mexican cartels are always in the news. Javier and I, we get calls from Fox and Newsbacks and some of those channels to come on and give opinions about certain things that are going on. They are as violent as the Colombians were. I mean, the Colombian it's one of the most beautiful countries in the world, believe it or not. It really is. The people are the law-abiding, hardworking people down there are fantastic. They're easy to get along with. They're very proud of their country. And I'm sure the Mexican people are too, but through the intimidation and the corruption factor that the cartels have imposed on there, the place is out of control. And then you've got the president that just left. I won't say his whole name. He's referred to as AMLO. That had to be the most corrupt politician that's ever lived in Mexico, or the most naive politician. And we've said that on national news here in the United States. And I tend to believe he's the most corrupt. His theory was hugs for thugs, basically. He would say, he came out and said that Mexico didn't have a drug problem, that they weren't producing fentanyl. Really? They're not producing methamphetamine. They're not producing Mexican heroin. It's right there in the name, Mexican heroin, right? And he said that the United States has the drug problem. And he's accurate. When he says that, he's accurate about that. And we can talk about that in a second if you want to. But the different cartels in Mexico, their problem is they can't get along. It's like the gangs here in the United States. They kill each other because, they think they're smarter, they're more powerful, they're all greedy and egotistical to start with. But if they would ever come to a truce that they could live with, and it's been tried before, it's just never been successful, then they would pretty much be unstoppable. But they can't do it because, somebody wants to be number one. Somebody's got to be number one, right? And those egos are you can really capitalize on bringing an organization down like that. I think that they're really out of control with the violence that goes on down there. We've all seen the bodies hanging from the bridges. I've seen photographs of tortured individuals. Even Netflix, when they were going to start filming the Narcos Mexico series, they sent a scout down there, and he didn't talk to the right people to get permission, and they found him. I think he was shot 23 times. It's just the place down there is just outrageously violent. I will never go back to Mexico voluntarily. Javier and I were booked through our agent to speak at the Mexico City Arena in Mexico City before COVID. And when you book through our agent, it requires 50% deposit that's non-refundable. About 3 weeks after we signed the contracts, the arena folks called the promoters down there and said, "Hey, we've got to cancel. We're already getting death threats on these guys." And they lost 50% of their fee. We still got paid whenever we went down there, but it's just, I encourage my children not to go down there. It's just, my friends, I don't want them going down there. It's just too dangerous.
There's one thing to be said about criminals and the criminal mind that, through many of the interviews I've learned, criminals are the most opportunistic people that you'll meet. And that's the number one thing. Doesn't matter what criminal it is. There's many variations. There's some that have like very good rationale behind what they do, or like what they think is good rationale. Con men tend to think that there's a cure to what they're going to do, that they're going to do it legitimately at some point, which isn't really true. A lot of people lie to themselves. Some people know exactly what they're doing is pure evil. But the one thing that's guaranteed amongst almost all criminals is that they're highly opportunistic.
Yep.
It's something I've learned very well amongst interviewing some of the former criminals and investigators and prosecutors and everybody on each side of the law. And with that being said, that's another reason why I wouldn't want to go down to Mexico. The power struggle there between the government and the cartel might as well be the government.
Absolutely.
And it is. Let's be very honest. It is.
So at one point I was, in my career, I was assigned to Special Operations Division, DEA Special Operations Division. And I was in charge of the Mexico Central America section. And so we were doing some work with the Mexican government. We were going down to Mexico City, having meetings in the embassy, going over to the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General at that time was a guy named Garcia Luna. Look him up. He was just convicted in federal court in New York for all the corruption. The guy retired on a Mexican government salary, moved to Miami and bought like a $7 million or $10 million mansion down there. How do you do that on a government salary? Right. Just stupid. But you're right. The corruption is it's out of control down there. I don't know how they're ever going to get that back under control unless they let an outside influence come in and helping them. And it's a sovereign country. You can't invade a sovereign country like that unless you want to declare a war.
I'm not sure how they function exactly as a country, considering that the country is the cartel. But it's not as organized as some. As much as we might not like Pablo, it would have been a lot more organized under Pablo, if he were to become president. Because Pablo's just one guy who just would have wanted to be a dictator. A lot of these guys are just toppling on top of each other. Second, Joaquin Guzman goes down, everybody else comes up, and it's a mess. It's not it's not even like the American mafia, because even then there was organization. So that's another reason why I wouldn't want to go. There's
It's
no
outrageous.
It's ridiculous. It's sad too, I would say.
It is.
Very sad.
Here's the thing with Pablo. His business model, a lot of people like to tell us that had Pablo been in a legitimate business, he would have been successful. Here's his business model. I tell you to do something, you don't do it, I kill you. How are you going to do that in a legal business? You can't do that.
Yeah. Well, going from there, what have you learned about the criminal mind and the rationale behind a lot of these guys that want power and are willing to do anything to get it? What have you learned about the rationale and the thought process behind a lot of these people?
Well, what you mentioned there, being polycriminal, that they're willing to, opportunistic is how you refer to it. That's basically they're polycriminals, meaning they will take advantage of anybody committing any crime that puts money in their pocket or gives them perceived power. Okay, so if it's drug trafficking, they're not limited to just drug trafficking. There's human trafficking, there's counterfeit goods. I mean, just whatever they can get into, bank robberies, extortion, kidnappings, all that stuff. Criminals are, and I want to say 100%, but it's not true, because I know I'm like you. I've interviewed some criminals on my podcast, former criminals. I only interview them if they have atoned for their crimes and they have accepted responsibility for their crimes. And most of them are doing things to cooperate or teach law enforcement. A lot of them, I meet a lot of them through law enforcement conferences that Javier and I speak at here in the United States. That's where you learn. You learn, like the Mexican mafia. I've interviewed a guy named Mundo Mendoza twice, and actually we've got to be friends. And Mundo's in his 70s now, but I tell you what, I still wouldn't mess with him. He committed his first murder at age 15, killed a kid with a machete. What I learned from him is how ruthless the Mexican mafia really is. They do things outside the prison, but they run the prisons, especially in California. It's outrageous what they do. They play the legislators in California like marionette puppets. The way they do things, the way that they're able to get transferred around in the prison so they can still conduct their business. Their loyalty is to themselves, then their organization, and then if there's any family, that comes third. In my opinion, your priorities in life should be God, family, and your job. For me, I'm a Christian, but my priorities were always the job, and the job. My family always came second and God came third, which is really stupid, because I attribute the reason that I survived everything to God. It just wasn't his plan for me to be killed. I may die while you might have a heart attack while you and I are talking. I just don't know. But these criminals, it's like you said, they will take advantage of any situation. Just because they're a drug trafficker. I'll give you a perfect example. I've got a Patreon subscriber channel, and I have one of my monthly activities is a question and answer, and listeners I haven't turned down a question yet. And I just recorded it yesterday for this month. And there was a lot of questions about gang activity. One of the listeners wrote in that she lives in a small town in California, and the school resource officer came and addressed the parents about gang activity in their small town. And she was shocked that it was in the rural. You usually think that's LA, that's San Diego, that's, San Francisco, Sacramento, but it is in the rural communities. And so I did some research on it, and I gave her some stats, and I know that's not what she wanted to hear, but I'm telling, the point I'm trying to get across to her was that it doesn't matter where you live, it affects you. If a gang member comes in and they see you carrying groceries and your hands are full, well, you're a prime target for a robbery. Are you going to resist? That if you resist, they'll just kill you and leave you laying there. They have no remorse, no guilt feelings, no compunction whatsoever to commit these crimes. So that's what I've learned about criminals. There's no honor among thieves.
I feel like it's more so now amongst modern criminals. I think this is a very interesting time that we live in, where it's no longer these organized. I mean, there's still organization and organized crime that does happen, but I feel like, especially in the United States, it's a lot of highly chaotic, highly random attacks and acts of violence. And the worst part is there's no rules against it. So Most people aren't aware of this. I just watched a video on it, but it's called bail reform. Do you know what bail reform is?
Yeah, they want to let people walk.
Correct.
Let criminals out on the street.
Correct. And in New York, well, there's two laws that just are absolutely ridiculous to me. One is the shoplifting laws, so you could steal anything under $1,000, and yeah, you're laughing already, and you don't go to jail. Like you cannot get reported or arrested if you steal anything under $1,000. So that means that you and I, Steve, could go down to a store, shoplift in New York, anything under, as long as the handbag is under $1,000, you and I could steal it, and there's nothing that the store owner could do. Nothing.
Outrageous.
And on top of that, bail reform, there's countless stories where these criminals, also too, New York doesn't have a chase policy. They have a no chase rule. So if a criminal's like fleeing the scene, they have a no chase rule, right? At least in a car. But just to finish off the bail reform, there's people that have murdered people that have been arrested and charged, and the judge just goes, like, and they found like body parts in some of these people's houses. It's like they're literally allowing. There's been people that have gotten 3 assaults in one day, 3 arrests in assaults in one day, and guess what? Nothing. No, they have to let them go every single time. Why?
You're preaching to the choir here. I'm liking what I'm hearing you say. You know, and I tell you, when you get a chance, take a look at the squatter laws in some of the states, in California and New York specifically. Outrageous. It's just outrageous. And so now I'm going to get on my pedestal here just for my soapbox for a second. It seems to me that we've become so permissive in our country now that it's okay for anybody to do anything, and we're just supposed to say, oh well, you know. In Colombia there's a Spanish saying, it's que pena. It's like big deal, you know. I started working when I was 14 years old. I mean, you started a podcast probably, how old were when you started podcasting?
15.
So, and that's a job. I mean, this takes work. You've got to line up the guests, you got to do your research, you got to do the editing, the posting. There's a lot of work that goes into it. So that's a job. Well, you know, now I'm an old man and I'm still working in retirement. I'm probably putting in more hours now than I was when I was working for the government. And I just, you know, when people use narcotics, it comes down to the rules of making the decisions and living with the consequences. It doesn't matter what decision you make, there's going to be a consequence, right? If a consequence of going to a nice fancy restaurant, that's a good decision. The consequence is that you're probably going to have a big bill to go along with it. If you eat crappy food, well, you know what the consequence of that is. You're going to be spending some time in the bathroom, right? So there's a consequence for every decision you make. When people take drugs willingly, and I'm not talking about people who have legitimate injuries like sports stars and eventually unwittingly become addicted to pain pills and have to be weaned off of that. But people that decide, yeah, I want to try meth, I want to try heroin, I want to try coke, whatever it's going to be, and they become addicted to it, and then later they can't function on their own. Why should you and I have to spend our tax money and pay more taxes to take care of people who voluntarily decided to try drugs and became addicted? Do I feel sorry for them? Absolutely. You know, it's not a Christian mindset to say, hey, you're on your own, you made that decision. But the truth of the matter is, I feel no responsibility to take care of them at all.
Why do people do drugs? I mean, I have a few ideas, but tell me, why do you think people do drugs?
It's I think it's the curiosity to start with. I'll tell you what, George, when I was a little kid, I grew up in Tennessee and West Virginia. I was in Tennessee, maybe 10, 11 years old, 12 years old. And your buddies, you know, we're out running around our neighborhood and we're building tree houses, and we had a lake in our neighborhood. We'd go fishing. And one day, one of the guys had stolen a can of beer out of his dad's refrigerator, brought it out to us. And we all took a drink of that, you know. It tasted terrible. But you couldn't say that in front of your friends, right? Because of peer pressure. It's like, oh, that's great. You know. Well, then the next thing you know, somebody lifted a bottle of wine, and then somebody eventually brought a bottle of bourbon out there, and we all tried that. And what I'm saying here is that I think people are curious about marijuana. Now, I've never smoked weed. I don't know what the effects are. You know, I think it stinks. You know, I'm against legalization, to be honest with you, because I think it leads you to trying something more powerful. Just like I tried beer, and then you go to wine, that's a little more alcohol content, and then you go to whiskey, and that's a higher alcohol content. I think the same thing holds true with, let's try weed just to see what happens. Now, I'll be honest with you, if they ever legalize weed and there's a legitimate medical study done that says that it has no harmful effects on me, I'll probably try it because I have arthritis. One of my loyal listeners on the podcast suffers from fibromyalgia. She has chronic pain every day of her life. She's an older lady, and it's been like that almost since birth. And she says that smoking weed gives her some relief. You know what? I don't think anybody deserves to live with chronic pain. If she believes that smoking weed gives her relief from her pain for a little while, I don't have a problem with that. It's just, you see the legalization in the States here. I live in Orlando. They just tried to legalize marijuana here in Florida. It was voted down. But the question I have about it is, why are these lobbyists and these corporate groups spending hundreds of millions of dollars to legalize marijuana? You think they're not going to get something out of it? Just you apply common sense to it. And you guys, whoever's listening to this, if you don't smoke weed, I don't care. I just ask that you don't do it around me because it stinks. You can walk down the street in New York City and you smell it everywhere. So I think that's what it boils down to. I think people are curious. And then I think peer pressure has a lot to do with it, especially in high school and college.
Talk to me about advice you have for young people.
Well, this old man talking to you. It's an old man that's been around a little bit. I don't pretend to be something I'm not. I'm a small town country boy. I grew up in Tennessee and in West Virginia. I'm like a cross between a redneck and a hillbilly. I have never been a really tough guy. I don't pretend to be a tough guy. When I was a cop, I didn't back down from challenges or danger. You just have to do it smartly. But for young people, get your education, please. A high school education, a GED, go to college if you can. If you can afford it, go to college. Listen, I worked midnight shifts as a police officer and went to college in the daytime. It took me 11 years to get a 4-year degree. I got married and we had children. I got a divorce. Life happens. Switched jobs a couple of times to different agencies. But get your education and have a plan. Don't come out of high school thinking, I don't know what I want to do. A lot of people do that. I wanted to be a cop since I was a little kid. I never really wanted to be anything else in my life. And there's an old saying, especially for you young listeners, that if you find a job you like, you will never work a day in your life because you like the job. It's exciting to go to work. I found that job for 38 years. I never wanted to retire from law enforcement. I had no intentions of retiring. I was going to go a full 41 years before retiring until Narcos came along. And I got to tell you, life after DEA has been pretty sweet. I'm having a blast. I've traveled all over the world and somebody else is paying for it. My wife and I, I got to tell you, keynote speaking is more lucrative than being a cop. Okay. So we're not rich by any means, but we don't worry about eating cat food in retirement either. Have a plan and follow through with your plan. Don't be afraid to change that plan if you get into it. I started out in business in college and I hated it. That was what my dad wanted me to do. And then when I hated it so bad, I got put on academic probation my first year of college. And he was paying for college and he said, I'm not paying for that. So you're coming home. And I went to a local state college and got my criminal justice degree. Don't limit what it is you think you can do. I'm a small town country boy. The town I grew up in West Virginia, 9,000 people. It's less than that now. If I can do it, there's absolutely nothing special about me. If I can be successful, you can as well. It's all right here. You make the decision every day. Are you going to have a good day or are you going to have a bad day? You know what? You can there's a saying that says, take lemons and make lemonade out of it. It's all up to you. Are you going to let other people screw your mind up to the point that they make you miserable? Because they'll try. Other people don't like happy people. So it's, you take it with a grain of salt there. The advice I give you, it really is up to you. Don't limit yourself. You can do anything you want to do.
going from there, what do you think the biggest lesson that you learned as a cop and a DEA agent was?
Wow. The biggest lesson. Um, when you're a cop, especially a uniform cop, I was a uniform cop, and then I was a railroad cop, and then I was a DEA agent. What I learned in uniform is that most people will lie to you. Because unless they're needing help, if they're needing help, they're going to tell you everything. But if you approach somebody, they either think they're in trouble or they're about to be in trouble. And you have to learn to recognize the telltale signs of someone when they're lying to you. What I learned from being in DEA is that I made the right decision in life and not ever trying illegal narcotics. I've seen the devastation it could cause, how it tears families apart. I can see how it tears people apart, both physically and mentally. I guess my one regret would be that I always put the job first. As I got older and our kids were growing up, we've got 4 kids, 2 boys and 2 girls, and they all played sports. I missed a lot of activities because I put the job first. So you've got to find a balance. If you're going to go into the law enforcement field or the criminal justice field, your significant other, whether that's your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, whatever it is, needs to be somebody that can tolerate that, because it's not a job, it's a lifestyle. I mean, there's times when you leave, you don't know if you're going to be back for 3 weeks. You may end up in other parts of the world, and if you get a chance to call your family, you can't even tell them where you are. So, I guess all of that, what I learned is from all those jobs, was to get your priorities straight. I'm an old man now, and I'm still not sure I have my priorities straight, but that would be my recommendations.
What are some of the tells that somebody's lying?
Well, there's courses out there you can take. Some of the obvious things are overt nervousness, failure to make eye contact, sweating for no reason at all. There's you watch the eyes will flicker a certain way. You'll have to do some. I'm not going to tell you what. You'll have to do some research to find that out. But there's telltale signs that if somebody's lying, their eyes will tend to drift off one direction or the other. One way to really come across is ask people questions that you already know the answers to, and then see what they have. See what they come up with. And then if they're lying to you on that question, they're going to lie to you on the other questions. I'll tell you, when we used to stop people, and there's 2 people in a car, and this was I would go out and work with state troopers occasionally on interdiction on the interstates, and I did it just to go out and have some fun because I thought it was interesting. But if there's 2 people in the car, the first thing you do is separate them and get their story. Where are you coming from? Where are you going? What are you going to do when you get there? What's the name of the people you're going to meet when you get there? That kind of thing. And you ask them both separately the same questions, and then you compare notes. They never match. So that's the other ways of finding out people are lying. It's, there is a technique to it. There's you got the behavioral analysis unit that the FBI has. They're fantastic. Those are they're almost like soothsayers, like mystics, because they, through their education and expertise, they predict human nature and human criminality. It's fantastic. That's a lot of psychology that's involved in that. It's really interesting to talk to some of those folks.
Talk to me about the most meaningful moment of your career. What was the most meaningful or impactful moment of your career?
Well, it was my 2 sons are biological. My 2 daughters are adopted. So my wife and I adopted our daughters in Colombia. One was born right outside of Bogota, and one was born in Medellin. That was the biggest moment of my 38 years as a police officer. There's been other significant moments that you remember. You go into these violent neighborhoods, and when you do a big roundup, you arrest a lot of people that you've been investigating. You've already built a case on them. You've got them dead to rights. And when you come out and you put them in the police cars and leave the neighborhoods, when people stand out on the street corners and applaud because you've taken these criminals out of their neighborhood, that's a good feeling, because you don't get a lot of thank yous in law enforcement, you know. But yeah, adopting my daughters, that's the biggest thing. Monica was 8 months old when we adopted her. Mandy was 5 months old. They're now 30 and 31. Mandy's got her own family. Monica's getting serious about a guy that she's dating. So I guess that's the most memorable.
So going from there, do you have any regrets? Do you have anything that you wish you had done differently?
Yeah, but there's the way things worked out. I mean, if I had to do it over again, I probably wouldn't have gotten married the first time, because I got a divorce. It only lasted 3 years. But like my career, everything, if I went back and did things differently, I wouldn't have the same results in the end. You know what I mean? So I love being a uniform cop. I just wasn't making any money out of this. I started in 1975. I did that for 6 years. And after 6 years, I was making my salary was probably $12,000 a year, $1,000 a month. I was having to work every side job I could get. I worked off duty. I worked as an electrician's helper for a fireman. I got the sports contract for the local state college to provide security at that. I even sold Amway. I don't know if you know what Amway is, but it's kind of a pyramid scheme is what it is. But I mean, you did what you had to do to make ends meet. And when I became a railroad policeman, my salary from the city almost doubled immediately. So that financially, that was a good decision, but railroad policing is not really what I wanted to do. I did it, quite honestly, for the money. But one of my best friends that was a railroad cop, Pete Ramey, he's the one that I didn't know what DEA was. He's the one that introduced me to DEA. He had been a Virginia State trooper, worked as a task force officer for DEA, and that just sounded like what I wanted to do. So if I changed anything, I wouldn't have ended up going to DEA. And I know, I think things happen for a reason. I don't believe in luck, and I don't believe in coincidence. I think everything happens for a reason.
Now, on the more fun side, talk to me about the $300,000 bounty you had. So,
when they first tell you that, it's a little disconcerting.
I would imagine, but it's gone now,
Yeah.
as far as I'm aware.
This was in 1991 when I got to Columbia, and Javier, my partner, had already been there for 3 years. And that first week when I got there is when Pablo surrendered. So I'm strutting around like, hey, he heard Murphy's in country. He might as well just go ahead and surrender, and that's a joke. But then a year later is when he escaped. And that's when the very next day, Javier and I moved from Bogota to Medellin. And for the next 18 months, we lived with the Colombian National Police in Medellin. We were going out on operations every day. We're set up a 1-800 tip line. We were talking to informants, doing surveillance. I mean, all the things that you do. And, I know this is going to sound very strange, but you get complacent about things, even danger. You get complacent about danger because it's happening every day and you're surviving. And you start thinking you're Billy Badass. Now you're probably going to have a problem. You've got to keep your wits. You got to keep common sense working up here and realize who you are and where you are. But if you dwell on the fact that that your life's worth 300,000, and of course, you're trying to be tough in front of all your buddies, and you're like saying, "Oh, that's all. I'm worth more than $300,000." But that's just a front that you're putting up. But if you let that dwell on your mind, and that's what's in the forefront, you're going to get yourself killed, or you're going to get your colleagues killed or hurt. So, I think initially you talk about it to other friends and you realize that nobody else is really worried too much about it, because it was on every DEA agent down there. And back then we only had maybe 20 agents for the whole country of Colombia. Or, well, out of Bogota. We had more agents up in Barranquilla. So, you just, you don't worry about it too much. And again, being a Christian, I feel like when my time's up, my time is up. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. I don't worry about things like that. I don't want to die, but I don't worry about it either.
So there's you reminded me of something. So there's a quote by Charlie Chaplin. It's a story. I think it's his last words even, where somebody asks him, I think a priest said to him, I hope God has mercy on your soul. And then Charlie Chaplin goes, I sure hope so too. I mean, he owns it after all.
There you go. There you go. That's a good way to put it. I had never heard that, but I like it.
Yeah, it sounds way better in the actual quote, but that's the idea of it.
You got the point across.
Yeah. So, did you have anybody actually try to take it though?
To kill me?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's you're going out on operations all the time. 38 years as a cop. I can't tell you how many shootings I was involved with. Not that I was shooting every time, but 1989 in Miami, we were doing a deal. My partner, Kevin, he and I and a third agent were the inside arrest team for an undercover agent and an informant that were going to do a deal for 17 kilos of coke. And, we had backup teams dispersed out through the neighborhood. And two bad guys showed up, and it was a straight out ripoff. They were there to get our money, and they put our agent and the informant down on the floor. We ended up in a gun battle, and Kevin got hit twice. He survived. He got hit with 2 45 caliber slugs, one below the elbow and one above. The informant caught a 357 caliber round right in the throat. He never made it to the hospital. So, it just comes with the job. Back then I had the ability to deal with situations like that. And all the shootings I've been in, I've never felt bad about any of them. I felt like they were all justified. Never lost any sleep on any of them, except when Kevin was shot, because that was my partner. He was off for about a year. He recuperated, came back on, and he finished out his career with DEA. In fact, he lives here in Florida also. But I haven't met a cop yet that took the job as a law enforcement professional to go out and kill people. It just comes with the job. There are occasionally, and I mean very rarely, bad apples that make us all look bad in law enforcement. And I say this on the show. I'll say it to anybody that'll listen to me. Nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop. You take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution and your fellow Americans, and you stepped all over that oath to do something illegal. You belong lower than the criminals that are in prison in my book. I just have no sympathy for that. Make us all look bad, and they give us all a bad name. And now what's that lead to? We've got the defund the police movement, which is one of the most asinine things I've ever heard of. But that's probably another episode.
So, to end off, what do you think this country needs? Like, what do you think the United States needs, considering the insane influx of crime and drugs and narcotics and, all around just lower morale, I would say, as a country, and even a lack of pride to be an American in many cases. So what do you think this country needs?
I think people need to be held accountable for their actions. Okay. We all know what laws are. We're seeing now that, laws are, in many cases, are not being enforced because police officers know they're going to get sued if there's a confrontation. I think that we should, and part of being held accountable is accepting responsibility for your actions. I think we should stop being so permissive that anything goes. Legalization of drugs. We saw California or Oregon and Washington State both legalized various drugs, including heroin, methamphetamine, and cocaine, and psychedelic mushrooms. You see them, they're backtracking on that now. So I think we need to quit being so stupid about things. I think that people who are not, what I'm getting ready to say is makes me sound like a Trumpster, but it's the way I feel. If you're not proud of living in this country, get the hell out. This surprises a lot of people. One of my favorite musicians is Pitbull. I love his music. I don't like the language he uses, but here's what I like about Pitbull. I saw a video of him. He was at a concert, and somebody asked him a question about being in the United States and putting the United States down. He stopped the concert. He said, listen, I grew up in a communist country. I was fortunate enough to escape and come to the United States. This is the best country in the world. And if you don't like it, get the F out. I love that. I've lived in a foreign country. I've been all around the world, all of that. It's great to visit those places, but it makes me appreciate living in the United States. I was offered to go back overseas to Colombia to be the big boss down there over 3 different countries. I turned it down because I like living in the U.S. So, we're seeing now that, the war between Israel and the Palestinians, well, that's over there in the Middle East. Why are we fighting that battle here in the United States? I know which side I side with, and they seem to be the ones that aren't causing the problems. The other group seems to be the one that's doing all the protesting. And if you're that passionate about it, then carry your happy butt over there and fight for what you believe in. Don't sit around here, running your mouth and destroying our country. So I'm probably going to make a lot of enemies off of what I'm telling you right now. But, I appreciate you asking me how I feel about things, because that's the way I feel about it. I've got friends all around the world. I love the UK. My grandmother on my mom's side immigrated from England. So I love the UK. I love Scotland, England, Ireland, and Wales. But do I want to go live there? No. I like to visit, but I don't want to go live there. Australia, New Zealand I love it down there, but I don't want to live there either. So if, stand up, be a man. I think men should be men again. Quit being wimps. This gender identity thing, I just completely do not understand it. Determining a person's gender identity is real simple for me. But it's just like anything goes in our country anymore, and I just don't like it. I know I'm getting old. I guess I'm sounding like my dad. I don't know. I'm getting to be a crotchety old man, I guess. Grumpy old man.
Well, I'll put it to you this way. There will never be another United States.
No.
So, or at least there has yet to be. So, there's been a lot of imitation. A lot of Europe is just clone America, or at least they try to be. There's no country quite like the United States. And there's a lot of problems with the United States, absolutely. But there's so many great things about it. And yeah. I hate when people say it's the worst country ever. It's bad, or it's like, okay, yes. There's a lot to be said about the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But to say it's a bad country, no. I think the founding principles of the United States are pretty awesome compared to almost every other country. It's freedom. It's happiness. You get to live life on your own terms as long as you don't hurt anybody else. That's it. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
There you go.
I don't know what's a better thing to ask for a country, right? Unity, endless unity, everybody has to be working together all the time. No. Because when you're working together all the time, chances are it's for one guy and his interests, right? That's what the Soviet Union was. Union. Mm-hmm. It was unity. It was one goal. And we all saw how that turned out. It was just one guy's interests, Stalin's. But United States, nobody really has all the power, right? You could say billionaires, or this guy or that guy or this group of people or that group. I don't know. But you know what? As compared to China, if I were to criticize the government in the United States, I could go to the White House and criticize the government, right? I can't do that in China.
Oh, absolutely not.
Right.
I'll tell you what, if I had a flag, I'd be waving it for you right now, because I agree with everything you just said. It is the best country. It's, what I think if I had my druthers, I would, if I could be king for a day, dictator for a day, every American would be required to go live in a foreign country. They can choose whatever country for a year and then see if you want to come back. I love it that all these people, when the election's going around, regardless of who you voted for, I try to stay as apolitical as I can on the podcast. When I'm on Patreon, I get a little more political oriented over there. But regardless of who you voted for, people are saying, well, if so-and-so gets elected, I'm moving out. Well, if your candidate didn't get elected, go make your plane reservation, pack your crap, and go. Don't sit around and make idle threats like that. And you hear that coming from well-known people. That's another thing that drives me crazy. Whether they're movie stars, sports stars, social influencers, whatever they might be, who the heck are you to tell me what I should think? What I should believe and what I should do? That's not your right. That's the difference between us and most of the rest of the world. We have that freedom, just like you said, to make our own decisions. And one other thing, I say this as often as I can: don't let other people tell you what to think. We're all intelligent. We've all got a brain. We can make our decisions. The media and politicians will be the first to tell you what to think. And then you got lobby groups, and then you got these special interest people that all want to tell you how you should think. Find out what the issues are, research them yourself, then you make up your own mind. I don't, the thing on the news where they have these talk shows and everything, and they just come out and they cry because so-and-so didn't get elected, or, they just get their little feelings hurt. Well, suck it up and be a human being. What is it that you can do for your country? Robert Kennedy said, John F. Kennedy said that, JFK. Don't ask what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. That's what makes us great.
All right. I think that's a good place to end off.
All right, man.
Any final words before we talk a little bit after the show?
Just, you know what? Thank you very much for having me on the show. It's, you are the youngest person I've ever done a podcast with, and I've done a lot of podcasts over the past several years. And if you would, come and check out my podcast, Game of Crimes with Murph in the Morning. I'm on YouTube now. Any audio station that plays podcasts, you can find me on there. So thanks for having me on the show.
All right, no problem. In 3, 2, 1.